No, I was starting to say I was on a podcast this week, and it's funny. I'm going to admit this to both of you guys on here. I'm not good when I'm on the other side when I'm a guest. I feel like, and I'm like really self conscious, and it's so good to be back on this side of the chair because I always find myself like attempting to steal the microphone when I'm a guest, and like I don't know, it's challenging to be on their side. I give people credit that are like really good that can do both
Well, I think
sides
you're
of the mic.
great at it, Mike. I mean, I never see you stealing the mic. And if anything, that's what I feel too as a host is that, you know, you never really get to say what you think because you're asking somebody and, you kind of think they might give an answer that you think they're going to give and then they don't, or they, and it's like, okay, but nobody asked me what I think. Anyone asked me, but it doesn't work that way. So you're fantastic. I think at, sort of staying out of it and letting your guests develop. But yeah, I mean, this is our first time being on this side of the microphone ever. We're relatively new as podcasters, and yeah, as soon as you went 3, 2, 1, go, I was like, uh-oh, it's a funny feeling. But
Well,
thanks for having us on. It's great. It's great to see you.
well, thanks for doing this. And what's funny is though, is like I don't look at you guys, and we'll get into your backgrounds. And this is when people ask me, I'll do it, but I'm not that interesting. Like I'm not a student of history. All right, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a economist. I'm not an author like our friend Kunstler. I'm not any of that stuff. So it's
Well,
nice that people ask me, but I just ask open-ended questions. Maybe that was my telemarketing days and my copier days, and
it
I go.
seems like your telemarketing background probably is paying off. It probably seemed like a mind-numbing like job at the time, but it probably developed a lot of skills for you.
Well, what is the open-ended questions, right? What, where, why, how, and who? I mean,
Right, exactly.
Yep.
It was
and
funny, those early jobs. Like, so my first job out of college, Len and I went to a liberal arts college in the Midwest, and um, so they had at that time they didn't help you get a job at all. So I was a history major. I studied, Asian history and stuff, and Japanese language and stuff that was interesting to me when I was that age. And then I got on the job market like nothing. No, I had no clue of even where to look. I didn't know what people did for work. Like I didn't know, So and plus I had no marketable skills whatsoever. Anyway, my friend got me a job selling cars. So my first job out of college was selling cars. And it was great. I mean, it was such a great training for me. I use it all the time in terms of like convincing people and closing the deal and knowing what to say and knowing when to shut up and those sorts of things. It's all car sales. I thought if I'd ever write a book, it would be everything I needed to know. I learned selling cars because it was like you saw so much about how people make decisions and when they're ready to make a decision and reading their body language and all this kind of. So those first jobs, I talk to a lot of people about their first job, and it always is very, you know,
My my
leaves a
first
mark on
job
them.
was selling shoes at an athlete's foot store at the Century Mall in Chicago.
were you at
Yeah.
Foot Locker, Len? Where were you?
It was called the Athlete's
Oh,
Foot.
Athlete's Foot. Yeah. Did
Yeah.
you go to
Yeah.
Camelot Music? Did you make all your money at Athlete's Foot and go to Camelot or Tower Records and spend it?
Yeah, I probably did. I probably did spend it on records
Yeah.
or
Yeah. No, I don't,
pot or
I don't know
pot.
if that's impacted you, Len, or not, but yeah, my car sales job was
I didn't stick with it
work.
long enough, and I was
Yeah.
so bad. I'm a terrible salesperson. I think it's just my background. I just can't sell. Um, I'm probably like, what's that show?
Married with
Ted
Children?
Ted Bundy.
Yeah,
Yeah, Married
marriage.
with.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, but also, I mean, think about the money you spent to get that degree, Patrick, and what would that have cost you today? You'd have been the whole hundred over a
Oh,
hundred grand.
it's crazy. Well, I've thought about this a lot because, I've put kids through college now and it's so expensive. And of course, you know why? It's admin costs. The admin costs have gone through the roof and dealing, they've got officers for this and that and residential life and you name it. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have a lot of money, to go to college with and my I could have gone to state school for free and my parents, God bless them, they're like, Just do what you want." And I chose this liberal arts school instead. And I came out with I think about eight to $10,000 of student loans at a time when my first real entry level job, not the selling job, but was $18,000 a year. And so I guess that was maybe about 5 times your income. But you know, how does that equate to today? I mean, kids are coming out with 200 grand more of debt. And I think the thing about my debt, it was federally guaranteed and it was, interest rate clipped at like 2-3% in the 80s. But this, the student debt now is 15% compounded annually, and you can't get out of it if you by going, whatever declaring bankruptcy, you'll never get out of it. It's sort of the first thing you have to pay. And there are, all kinds of kids who would be in my shoes, liberal arts school students, and they're paying more than rent in student loans and forever. It's really kind of astonishing how they've kind of taken that
It
away.
limits what you can do with your life too. I taught
Absolutely.
I taught as an adjunct at DePaul Law School, and I had a lot of students I taught like federal criminal law, and um, I had a lot of students that were very idealistic and wanted to change the world, but they couldn't really. They really had to go after whatever the corporate law firm jobs they could get to try to pay back their loans. So you
Yeah.
become like a wage slave.
Yeah. I mean, we talked to your friend Matt Smith about this, and he was, how he feels about college now,
Yeah.
Mike, is that, there's better ways you could spend your money to get a real world education that'll help you more. I mean, I'm an employer now. I don't care where people went to college. It doesn't make a difference to me. I'm looking for people who can do certain things that I need to have them do. But whether they went to this college or that, doesn't matter a bit to me. I mean, and again, in the town that I grew up, not grew up, but I lived in Princeton for a number of years, a lot of education around that town. And people are obsessed with, you know, parents are obsessed with brands of college and, oh, they're going to get into this one, that one, like it matters. And it's like, I don't think the whole thing matters anymore. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't.
Isn't it crazy how and what do you guys think the future is? The Ivy League. I mean, Harvard went from. I mean, I when I was a kid, it was. I mean, just to be able to drive past it was something a privilege to me. And any type of movies I saw or anything affiliated with Harvard, it was like that was the elite of the elite. And now, what does it look like? And what will that be in 10 years?
Well, it's weird for me since I lived in an Ivy League town. You would have buses, like tour buses of Chinese parents who would just drive to do what you were doing, drive by and look at it, look at Princeton and go, oh, it's like I guess it's their dream to get their child into Princeton, whatever. But I knew people who read those applications, and if you look at say Princeton, they've got a certain cohort for legacies, right? So let's say there's 100% of the people, maybe 20. I'm not sure of exact numbers, but if 25% is for legacies, then you've got a big athletic program. So they're trying to fill seats for all, even a Division III school now. It's like they're filling up an athletic bucket. So you've got that. And then you've got, the diversity buckets. So they're looking for people who can fill certain diversity, thresholds that they want. Then you've got this tiny sliver of people who are none of those, who are just kind of like open admissions. It's real. Those are the smart ones, right? Those are the really smart because and for them, it's like, hey, you want a science award? We don't care. Is it the most prestigious science award in the nation? That kind of thing. It's like not just, oh, were you president of your science club? They laugh at that. So, but if you look at the overall class of say Princeton, it's a lot of dumbbells really who are getting loaded and networking. And my son says, oh, they're all training to be low level white collar criminals. And that's basically probably he's onto something there. So I don't know. I mean, the Ivies will be the last to go, but I just saw an article that a Harvard economist said that 50% of all colleges are going to go out of business in the next decade. I'm not surprised. I mean, you got a demographic problem plus a cost problem. But it's not the Harvards, it's the Concordias or, the ones the smaller schools that are all over the place. I don't see how they survive.
No, there's definitely. I think there's going to be some consolidation, but you also, you're seeing that where it's, I didn't watch sports for a while, and I've been finding myself watching more of it lately. And the college football I've watched, I watched the playoffs, and you're seeing now the consolidation. These big schools, like there's going to be basically there's two conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, and I don't know what like school, like I went to a Mac school, what's going to be the future of those athletics? But I think the same is for these colleges. Like, I mean, how are all these smaller schools going to survive? Is the
I don't
state
know.
going to be able to keep fund these schools?
I don't know. I mean, the state should. I mean, I'm always astonished. If you go to a town that has a state-funded technical school in it a lot, and I'm surprised how many people are foreign nationals, right? And why they're doing that. The but it's funded by the state, by the taxpayers of the state, right? And so they're taking on these foreign nationals who will pay full boat because their legislators won't fund 100% of their budget, right? So it's like, wait a minute. When my dad, I'm sure when Len's dad went to college, like what did it cost, Len? $50?
Yeah, I don't know. It probably, yeah. She certainly didn't come out with any debt.
Yeah. Oh, my dad went on the GI Bill, and I think it was literally like, $150 or whatever. But now, they're not letting in the kids from the state so they can let in foreign, and then those foreigners get all these technical skills and go back to their home countries. And what's, someone's not thinking it through in terms of, what education should be, in my opinion. But what do I know?
My
I'm not an
my
educator.
dad went to MIT, which we're now learning is like a CIA adjacent school. So it explains a lot about my family.
Is your dad John Wick, Len?
Yeah.
No, he yeah. I'm sure it was a different place when he was there. He studied physics and business. I followed in his footsteps in terms of studying sciences. I studied physics and engineering. And then when I came out of college with those two degrees, all the jobs were in defense industry. It was the Reagan years, um, and I knew I didn't want to build weapons. And I didn't have any debt because my parents paid for college. My family had resources, so I could afford to be a little more idealistic and try to find some career that would be have some meaning to me. I know a lot of kids today don't have that luxury. And then you also wonder, like, what is a college degree worth anymore? Like the kind of degree that Pat and I got, like the liberal arts. Um, you know, is it worth going into all that debt? Like, what do you get for it? It's going to be a strange world. I certainly, feel sorry for young people today. It's just such a confusing world to come into.
Yeah, it is really. And then when I did it, maybe I was just stupid, but I would just look at the course catalog and go like, oh, that looks interesting. Like, I speak French. Maybe I should learn Japanese. So I decided to do that. Why?
Right.
Because it's like, who learns Japanese? That's cool. So I had no idea if it would ever pay off. And I didn't have the resources to just be like a gentleman scholar, but I was kind of like that. Anything that was interesting to me, I just dive into. And I mean, there's that famous thing that Steve Jobs said about that. Have you ever heard that story about him taking a calligraphy class? So he
Mm-mm.
dropped out and he hung around, I think Reed College in Oregon. He never finished college, obviously, but he took like a calligraphy class because he felt like it, right? And like learned Japanese calligraphy. And then, he credited that with a lot of his design skills and, design intuition that he had was from taking this
Mm.
class. That was just a one-off. And at the time that he took it, he didn't know. Well, that's great, and there's definitely, I mean, in theory, I'm a big supporter of the liberal arts because in theory, should teach you how to think critically and all that, and have a little bit of knowledge about the world around you, and have the ability to learn how to learn. So if there's something you didn't pick up at college, you can learn it after college by just diving into it. But, hey, it's one thing when it costs like 10 grand, you know, and you were making 18, it's another thing when it costs 200 grand and you're making 40. So, it's just a different world now. And I
Well,
agree with you, Len. It's
what
like
you're
how,
saying, what you're saying about learning how to learn, I just wonder how relevant that feels for young people today. I have an 11-year-old, and she thinks all you need to do is just Google everything. Like, why should I learn like any skills? I could just ask my phone to tell me.
right. Well, I mean, so I was on the school board in Princeton for a number of years. And what I always thought at that time was, well, critical thinking skills are probably the most important. critical thinking and leadership are probably the most important skills you can learn because you're going to get all this crap information, right? And be able to sort through it. And again, that kind of leads us to integrity media a little bit. It's like, you know, if you've got some critical thinking skills, you try your best to parse through what you're looking at and seeing and say, hey, does this make sense? Does this even pass the smell test? Do I believe it? Here's why I believe it. Here's the evidence. You know, I think in a liberal arts background, you're used to defending your ideas or poking holes in other people's ideas or even, you know, the author's ideas. But, you know, you don't just accept it because it's in a book. And you certainly wouldn't accept it because you found it on Google or God forbid, on AI. And, you know, we could talk about, and we're not educators, so probably should think about, you know, independent media, but the AI thing is a whole new world. But anyway, yeah, I would think that critical thinking is probably more important than ever. But then that leads to the question: are any schools teaching critical thinking anymore? I think they're teaching like catechisms now. But
Yeah. Well, I find that my science training, it was an unusual background for law school because I ended up becoming a trial lawyer, but it's helped me sort of the scientific method and the logic of science and physics especially, I think helps me a lot in the law to sort of figure out a defense, put it all together so that it will make sense for a jury. Like all those skills seem to have helped me in the courtroom. So
Was that the plan though? I mean, that wasn't the plan for you. Because you
no, no. I thought I was gonna, I don't know what thought I was gonna do, but I liked math, I liked science. I never really read a book until I got to my last 2 years of college. I was at Columbia University in New York and started reading books for the first time because you buy them on the street. You know, they have like books laid out on a blanket. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I started reading fiction, and then I got, wanted to read everything from Dickens to Dostoevsky to, you know, Fitzgerald. So yeah, just I think being in New York, probably more than school, kind of opened my eyes to possibilities in the world. And law school was kind of an afterthought because, like I said, I didn't want to. The jobs that were the job offers coming to me as a physics and engineering major were all in the defense industry at that time, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't have to do that. So law school seemed like, it was kind of a way of putting things off, and I had parents that were willing to pay for it. So, I had that luxury.
Well, what is law school? What do you think it's like today for somebody that would be going through it the way you did? How different is it?
Yeah, I mean, my only experience is just teaching as an adjunct, which I did for about 10 years at DePaul, and then I had sort of a falling out with them, and I haven't taught again since I think 2021. Um, but yeah, I had a lot of students that were under a lot of stress. That really, I was teaching about criminal law, and a lot of them wanted to do something similar to what I was doing, but they just couldn't. Like there was just not enough money in it. To be a public defender or a federal defender, or they had to make money to pay back their loans, and it caused a lot of stress.
Could they handle it? I mean, the way you handled it at that age. I mean, do you think the stress level, it's harder for them to manage it now than what it was back then?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking back to my last year teaching was COVID year, and DePaul was particularly crazy about the vaccine. And that put a lot of stress on students because I had students that didn't want to get the vax or they didn't want to get a booster, and they weren't letting them enroll for the next semester. And so these were like second, third year students that had already invested so much and had so much debt. And, they had to make a choice. Like, do you want to give it all up or do you want to get this shot? And it was really, I don't know. I had one student that seemed to like be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Um, so
well, the
yeah, and
thing
that
the thing
caused,
about those
yeah,
years, Len, is that if you were that kind of person who you're questioning, why should you have to take this vaccine, you really felt like you were the only one. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't because they were suppressing, anybody on social media who had those kinds of questions. If you had any questions about anything, you felt like that's the way that they wanted you to feel, like you were the only one, you were the outlier and the weirdo,
and you're
and
selfish.
you're
when you're selfish.
selfish. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of judgment, and this.
Yeah.
We talk about it on our show sometimes, this Manichaean black and white view of the world, where it's like either you're good, because if you do and think these things, or you're bad, if you do and think these things. And so all of our, whatever, our military enemies are bad and they're dictators,
Yeah.
and we're on the side of good. And it's just like this very simplistic way of dividing the world. And again, if they control the information, then that's the way all your friends are going to look at you. Like, hey, are you bad? Well, like, why don't you want to take the? I don't understand. I thought you were a good person. Are you bad? And so, that's a little bit when we started developing our independent media efforts. To me, that was the information environment that I was reacting against. I'm sure for you, Leonard, you had more hard experience than I did with it. For me, it was just more like a feeling I had, and I had some hard experience too, but you really did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good segue to independent media because, yeah, if you wanted the truth, that if you wanted a different side, you really had to go away from mainstream media and corporate media. You weren't going to get it from there. They're all locked together. It's all a group think, and there's one acceptable opinion, and if you don't follow that, you're not going to be sitting in that chair in a corporate news station or writing for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. So I think, yeah, I mean, there was certainly, I think mainstream media really we saw how important it was through COVID and other things during that time. But
Yeah, that was to me, that was like kind of the mask off moment is COVID. And it started for me, like there's a guy when I'm not on social media anymore, but there was a guy who was on my Facebook, and like I knew he was, he's pretty eccentric, let's say that, maybe borderline crazy, but interesting. He always had interesting takes on things, even if you didn't, you know, you knew what kind of guy this was. You didn't think he was whatever. You didn't think he was the authority on stuff, but he was kind of like, every once in a while those crazy people are onto something, right? Those are the people with the clairvoyance and the Cassandras of the world. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're just out of their minds. But anyway, there was a guy like that, but he was fun to read. He got kicked off Facebook right away because he started calling it the clot shot, or even before it came out. He didn't trust cell phones, he didn't trust cell phone towers, he didn't trust anything. He doesn't trust money. And at the time I was like, this guy's crazy. Now, he may have been more right than I thought about a lot of things.
right,
But
we're
but
learning.
at that time I was just struck not by his opinion necessarily, but the fact that he just got stamped out. And I was like, wait, how did this guy, he didn't say anything do these people think that I'm going to suddenly, you know, change my mind because what this guy said? I'm just interested in his take on things just because it's kind of funny. But now that you're stamping him out, well, what's he up to? Like maybe he's onto something here. And it sort of made me think about things differently. It's funny how the censorship and that gives people more imprimatur than they would have if they just let him talk.
Right, it's true. Except sometimes they can silence you, if you no longer have a platform. I mean, obviously that happened to me. Um, you know, I wrote a column for the Chicago Reader for about 2 to 3 years, and my 21st column for the Reader was about the vaccine. And at that time I had a 6-year-old daughter, and there was a lot of pressure. This was 2021, I think. Um, and there was a lot of pressure to get her vaccinated, and there was talk about it becoming mandatory. And so, and I had already gotten my 2 shots, and I went and did some research about whether kids really need the vaccine, and I discovered this whole world out there that was not allowed on mainstream media of very well-renowned scientists, vaccinologists, immunologists that had a whole different view about the vaccine, and it was mind-blowing to me. And I wrote I sort of wrote a fair-minded piece, but quoting people from both sides, and reached the conclusion at the end of the piece that children didn't need the vax. It wasn't helpful to them. It wasn't going to stop the spread. They weren't at risk. And I got, as Pat will remember, I got, attacked. I ended up with protesters outside my house. I got fired from a paper. And So it was definitely an eye-opening experience. But still, I credit mainstream media for educating me, and I never got the vaccine for my child, which I'm grateful for. So,
Well, and I find it interesting now to where we're at because, you know, that to me should have been an eye-opening experience for people with 2020 to question. I don't trust anything anymore. Like I'm like the first one to like healthcare system, the experts. You know, I was talking to a relative yesterday, and he was talking to me about the Savannah Guthrie story, and I haven't been following it because there's so much other stuff going on
Yeah, I
right
don't
now.
follow it either.
is that the
Yeah.
kidnapping?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah,
mother's down in Tucson, 2 hours
okay,
from me,
right.
Uh-huh.
and my relative's like, well, I think could have been the cartel, and I said, well, I haven't been following it. I go, I don't know why the cartel would want to do that. They want to sell drugs and smuggle them into the United States. I don't think they'd want to abduct a celebrity's mother because they don't want to bring attention to themselves. But I said also with this, who knows what to believe? I don't know. I mean, every video I see, who knows if it's real? Minneapolis, I'm not there. I mean, unless you're there, you have no idea what's real and what's not real. And even
Exactly. You see things. Yeah, we have to remember that, the fact that we're reading things or seeing things doesn't mean that they're actually happening, or at least not the way that they were. And it's always been that way. My brother's a pilot, and he says, hey, anytime I read a story about a plane crash or a plane incident, they have it wrong. They have all the details wrong. And it doesn't work that way, right? I used to live in Malibu, and my mom would call me when I was in law school. I spent a summer in Southern California, and fortunately, I had a shack in Malibu, which was really cool. But anyway,
probably great, probably one of the greatest summers ever, right?
yeah, well, but people out there, they're like there's all these French, expats hanging out, and my neighbors were like, oh, yeah, Jim, the producer for The Doors, and not Jasper Johns, but David Hockney, the modern artists, all these people. But I had to go to work every morning, and like all the people that I got friendly with over that summer were like, where are you going? And it's like, well, I have to go to work, and I'm wearing a tie, and they're and they're in their swimsuits, and they're like, well, what are you doing that for?
So
It's like,
uncool,
well, I'm
man.
on this, I have a summer internship, and they're like, why? And then I'm like, well, because I'm in law school. I was like, well, why don't you just stay here? It'd be much funner to surf. And I'm like, all right, well, whatever. But yeah, it was great. It was great just to be around there, and they were real characters. But anyway, my mom would call, and she'd be like, if there was ever like a rainstorm or whatever, she'd be like, are you okay? I saw about all the flooding on the news. And I'm like, what? Like, what's, there's not flooding. And it's like, well, those canyons are really deep. And so, yeah, one of them might have a foot of water coming down it for a few hours, but they'd zoom right in on it, and they'd be like flooding in, in the Malibu area. And my mom thought the whole place was underwater, and you'd just be like, what? Like the news, I mean, none of that stuff was real. We always knew that, but it's like even more the case now, obviously. And I think, Mike, one of the things you were talking about is what's real. There was a thing that stuck with me in the Black. You ever read the Black Swan, Taleb's book? I read it after the financial crisis, like everyone did. But one of the things he said in there is like, take these. Imagine two people. One of them's a professor, and the other one is like a con man, right? And so you've got these two guys sitting there, and you're flipping a coin, flips heads. You flip it again, flips heads. Flip it again, flips heads. And so flip it again, it flips heads. And so ask the professor, it's like, okay, what are the odds of this coin flipping heads again? And the professor will be like, well, indeed, it's a 50-50 chance on every turn. And it's like, even though, five heads in a row is whatever, is a minuscule odds. And the con man will be like, it's going to flip heads because that's a fixed coin. That's the way it works. I don't care what the odds are. So there's kind of two people in the world, I think, two types of people. Either you're more like the professor, who you can believe some completely ridiculous thing, like the Ukrainians took a boat out and blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Like two guys got drunk and blew up the pipeline or whatever their story is, because people are telling you that's so. But if you're more like the con man in your worldview, you're like, come on, that's bullshit. That can't happen. Of course, someone with resources did it. Who has resources? Well, the United States does. Who else does? Nobody. Okay. Well, there's your answer. So, like, I don't know. Some of the time you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And like, if you're being asked to believe too much stuff that doesn't really make sense, then you're probably onto something, right? That it's not right.
I feel like one kind of gratifying thing is that people are no longer accepting official explanations for anything.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a change now. Because I mean, like we talked about the Charlie Kirk assassination, or Michael just brought up this kidnapping. I don't know. I saw my trainer. I haven't really followed this story, but I saw my trainer yesterday, and he was telling me that like Cash Patel had come on and announced that they had caught the suspect, and then they went and interviewed this guy, and he was like a UPS driver because they had was like a Ring doorbell picture of the kidnapper. And they went and they showed on video them like interviewing this guy, and he's like, "What the fuck are you guys doing here? I don't know anything about this." It was just like, completely wrong.
Yeah.
So I think I like that idea that people realize that the feds, they really don't know what they're doing. The only thing that they're good at is bank robberies, like solving bank robberies, because they've been doing that for so long, and it's actually kind of legitimate. Like they actually have legitimate jurisdiction over bank robberies. So they usually get those cases, they know how to investigate them. But all this other stuff is just, the feds should stay out of it, and they really mess everything up. So I think people.
Well, Leonard, you're a criminal defense lawyer, so you've seen the government in action. Even pre-COVID, you've seen the kind of things they do. I mean, you've told me many times about the kind of just really dishonest tactics that they'll use to put people in jail who don't belong there.
Well, what I've learned about the federal government is that, it's like any other. The Department of Justice is really like any other agency of the federal government. They work for the donors. They don't work for the people. And you see that again and again. The war on drugs, it creates more problems than it solves, but they don't care. They also they also have unlimited resources to throw at these things. And they never go after, I mean, like, I think most people's impression of the federal government is that they're sort of working hard to get to the top, work their way up the chain to find the most egregious offenders. And it's just completely not true. I grew up with, defending people in drug cases, and it's, they're not going after Pablo Escobar. They're going after 15 kids that grew up in a housing project, and they charge them all, and they make them all tell on each other. People that were selling $10 bags in stairwells. That's what the federal government is using their resources on. I remember, you've spent so much time in court. I haven't, but I'm a lawyer too, but I literally never spent time in court. But I was asked to be a juror in 2009. I've told you the story, Leonard. Yeah.
That
mortgage fraud, right?
Yeah, it was mortgage fraud. I didn't get picked for the jury, but this is right after all of these, all the banks had been bailed out. People like Angelo Mazzillo, remember that guy with like the permatan who ran Countrywide Financial, made hundreds of millions. Countrywide Financial, hundreds of millions. Doing these fake mortgages. You remember, Mike, because you were in Arizona at that time. Millions of fake mortgages, and they were making money off it, of course. And these guys got huge bonuses, and then they got bailed out by all of us, and then they got more bonuses after that. So they put someone on trial in Trenton for mortgage fraud. It's an African-American kid, maybe 29, that age, who owned a few houses that were like $100,000 each. And, lo and behold, he had overstated the value of his mortgages, and they were now underwater, and they wanted to put this kid in jail.
Right.
For mortgage fraud. And I was just like, oh my God, please put me on this case. I will like jury nullify this thing, because all of these people walked, and you want this kid to go to jail. Right. That's like sick.
So did you Patrick, did you represent, or whatever happened with that?
No, I was just in the jury pool.
Oh,
so I was just doing jury duty.
Did he get off?
I don't know. I don't know it. But there were hundreds of those cases.
But I represented a lot of those people, and I mean, and not only like your guy. So he maybe inflated his income, but they all did that on behalf of the banks, because the banks would send their loan officers in there, and they would tell them, oh, you make $28,000 a year, you got to bump that up to meet these ratios. Yeah. And they called them liar's loans. This is like they passed this because they were selling the loans to suckers.
It was crazy in Phoenix.
They didn't care if these people could pay them back. They were just getting rid of the paper. and it was a big scam. And like all things with the federal government, instead of working their way up the chain, and as Eric Holder said, these banks are too big to fail, or too big to jail. They're too important. We can't really lose these guys. I mean, and so they went after the low-hanging fruit, people like the guy Pat's describing,
Well, the other thing they
African
did,
American guy that
the other thing they did at that time, they found Bernie Madoff. So, I think, when you think about Epstein, I have the feeling they're going to find a scapegoat, because what they did with Bernie Madoff is, this is a guy who was running a Ponzi scheme, at least as far as I know, right? He was running a Ponzi scheme and paying off, old investors with new investors' money, and it was working quite well for quite a while. And then the financial crisis disrupted everything, and he couldn't do that anymore, and so he was sort of hung out to dry. But if you remember the coverage of Madoff in the time, he was the scapegoat for the financial crisis, even though he had nothing to do with the financial crisis. He was just he was a scammer of wealthy Park Avenue types. But, they tried to make it seem like Bernie Madoff did this, and, now he's in jail. And so nobody else needs to go to jail. Now, when I was a young lawyer, it was my summer, but I talked about out in Malibu, there were guys from the savings and loan crisis. And in that instance, they went after the CEOs.
That's
right.
right.
And they
They
put
did.
people in jail that time. And I worked on like little bits of defense for some of those guys. But that was a long time ago. Nobody went to jail except
Those,
the 29-year-old African American who,
well,
overstated.
and dozens others like him,
Yeah.
because the feds, when there's a crisis and the stock market crashes and people lose their homes, they'll do press conferences, and the attorney general will say, we take this really seriously. We're going to put people in prison. And of course, the people they put in prison are the peons,
Yeah.
people that were the suckers in
Right.
the game.
Well,
Yeah, and by the way, as you said, like they needed those guys to make the whole thing work.
Right.
They needed, not only they say like, hey, inflate your income, they'd be like, hey, you know what? That I know this happened. They'd be like, that appraisal didn't come through. I know another guy. Let's try another appraisal. And so they'd get their appraisal to get pumped up, because they were selling the paper. As you know, if you watch Big Short, I guess it's in there, but I never watched it, but I know what they did. They were chopping up these mortgages into bits and then selling the bits over and over again and getting fees every time. And it was very, very lucrative. But they needed those 29-year-olds to create
They
the
did.
product.
Yeah, they needed the paper.
Yeah.
And like you say to these people, look, you can have a home 100% financing. You don't need any money.
Yeah.
All you need is like a decent credit score. And if you don't have a good credit score, find somebody that's got a good credit score and use
Yeah.
them as your buyer. And now you could be Donald Trump. You could buy 4 or 5 properties, and
Yeah. I knew people I knew people who were either doing that or tempted to do that. They could do no money down. And there were these homes in California, little crappy homes that were built in the 1940s, and they were like a shotgun, shack, and they were worth $500,000
let's say
or
600
whatever.
grand.
Yeah, 600 grand, and
Yeah.
it's like no money down, and it was all a scam. But again, nobody got prosecuted, and they found a scapegoat, maybe either the poor peons, or they find a big splashy Bernie Madoff type. I wonder if Epstein doesn't end the same way. Like they threw this British guy Mandelson to the wolves, and they'll throw a few other people to the wolves and go, it's all them, and it's like, okay, it's all done now. Time to move on.
Well, here's the interesting thing about Epstein. Well, 2 things about that. I'm glad you brought that up, because one, I had Dave Collum on a couple days ago, and we were talking about this. And I don't know if you know he's a chemist.
Oh yeah, I
at
listened to him
Cornell.
on your show. Yeah.
But he said, and I didn't realize it, like apparently he won the lottery, Epstein,
Really?
once or twice. And
Twice.
once,
Nice.
maybe it was twice, but and someone will fact check me on this in the YouTube comments, because
Well, the professor would tell you, like, hey, he had as much chance. You buy a ticket in a dream, that's the way it works.
Well,
You have as much chance as anyone, just like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory.
Well, here's what he said to that. He's like, you always hear about these winners, right? Like these Powerballs, but you hear if somebody won it, you never see them. And then I remember hearing wasn't there a stat, and I could be wrong about this, but like most of the people that win the lottery end up bankrupt.
Yeah.
But you never see the people, you never see them. Maybe there is a photo op occasionally, and then just gone. So then you're like, all right, we laundering money here, all these Powerballs. Like who's at the top of this food chain, controlling all this?
Right. That's interesting. I don't know. And I don't, that's
Makes
another
you wonder,
story.
though, doesn't
I
it,
don't
though, that the lottery, like...
Yes. I mean, look, as you said, why would you believe anything, like anything you shine a light on, is going to raise doubts. And hey, those doubts might just be small doubts, and maybe it's really true. Not everything is false, I don't think. Maybe it is. But you got to question everything. Remember there used to be a bumper sticker that said question everything? Like that was an
Question
attitude.
authority.
Question authority, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It's funny too. Like, yeah, maybe who knows? I don't really follow the Epstein story that closely because at the end of the day, I don't under, just like you said, Mike, it's like I'm reading all this on the internet. I don't know. So I don't have any strong opinions about it, but it certainly is a very weird story, and who the hell knows? But but to me, the thing is questioning authority. To your point, Leonard, like now people do. Now people are starting to go like, wait a minute, like maybe everything they're telling us isn't really true, and I think that's very healthy, at least as a first step, right? Like you start questioning and saying, well, let's do your own research. Remember, like they tried to make do your own research into an epithet.
Right.
Like, what are you, some kind of
Yeah.
person does their own research? These are like educated people saying this,
Yeah.
right? Like you don't trust the authorities. It's like, well, okay, tell me what authority you do trust. Like, why? Anyway, that's the way it is.
Let me
With
throw
Epstein.
some.
Go ahead.
No, I want to throw something else at you guys about Epstein. This came up yesterday when I was talking to Chris Martinson, and I asked him the same question. 3 million, whatever it was, 2 million, 3 million documents that were unlocked, right, over the last week. Where are his tax returns? He ever filed taxes? I mean, he was a teacher at one point, right? I think he was a teacher somewhere. So you have to.
Taxes? He also supposedly ran a hedge fund, but he never filed any of the forms you need to file.
But as a teacher, he was a W-2 though, right? At one point, if you're an employee, you would have had to have gotten a W-2 at that time. So if he went from that to being a hedge fund man, where was his last where was his last W-2? What was it? How much was it for? And was he exempt from filing taxes?
Right.
I don't know.
It's a good question. Well, there's so much. I mean, they dribble out these documents. I mean, yeah, 2-3 million is a lot of documents, but there's so much that we're not seeing. And there's the whole, he clearly was connected to intelligence. We've known that since Costa was a U.S. attorney and admitted that in, I think, 2008, when he was a U.S. attorney down in Florida, admitted that he was told to back off because he's with intelligence. And we'll never get to the bottom of that. We'll never see the connections with our own. I mean, there's some information about his links to Mossad, but what about our own CIA? I think Hayden was the CIA director there. No one's ever asked him. We're not going to see any of those documents. We're not going to see where all his money came from and all the blackmail schemes. So
you'll never see it. Well, so we should mention our pod. So we do a podcast called Unfettered Speech. Leonard and I do. We've done about 20 how many episodes?
30 almost.
30, almost 30 episodes. So
great names, by the way. I was listening to Jimmy Dore right before we went online.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So we had Jimmy on just last week, so it's coming out soon. But we had Glenn Greenwald on, and Glenn sort of pointed out that, you've got this whole branch of government that is completely unaccountable, right? It takes a ton of resources, and they can classify anything they want. So it's like there's no checks and balances on them. So, that's the part of the government you're talking about, Leonard. It's like, okay, so you think they're going to tell you what they did with Jeffrey Epstein?
Right.
No, it's never going to happen, right? So,
and they could just go into court and say this is classified for national security reasons, and the judges won't push back. And it's it's supposed to be very limited. The things that are kept secret, we're supposed to know everything about our government. They're not supposed to know everything about us, but it's been reversed. They know everything about us, but we're not allowed to know anything about them. And the classification rules, like you said, Pat, they're used to protect them from any sort of criminal responsibility for crimes that they commit, and to protect government officials from embarrassment. And that's not what they're supposed to be used for. But federal judges just roll over when the government comes in and says, no, it would be dangerous to national security to let this information out. And that's it.
Well, talk about your experience defending a Guantanamo detainee.
Yeah. Well, I certainly had an experience. I got my eyes open in terms of the whole system of overclassification. I represented a guy, like a lot of the people that were at Guantanamo. He was never charged with a crime. He was like a farmer, like a country bumpkin from outside of Kandahar. and he got sold to the Americans by some Afghan warlords, which is basically what was happening then. In fact, the federal government they dropped flyers saying because they needed to find supposed terrorists to fill up Guantanamo. That was the whole point of going into Afghanistan to get all these high-level Al-Qaeda people. So they basically were offering $5,000, $10,000 to turn someone in. No questions asked. They weren't following the Geneva Convention. So my client was one of the people that got sold to the Americans, sent to Guantanamo, no hearing. And as I represented him, I filed a habeas petition to get him out. And the government's case, like their theory for why he was there was so ridiculous. And then there was a leak by Assange of Guantanamo files, which really blew the lid on a lot of things. And the government's case completely fell apart. And then they announced at one point to our judge in DC, well, we found a new document that's really incriminating, and it shows that this guy is really dangerous. And I said, oh, great, let me see it. And they said, no, it's classified above your security clearance level. I had a security clearance. I had to have one in order to work on the case. And I said, Judge, they can't do that. He said, well, it's up to the government if they say it's above your security clearance. So they said, we'll give you a summary of it, which is complete bullshit. So I actually wrote a column about this and just about the Mickey Mouse nature, kangaroo court. Like, how can a lawyer defend somebody if you can't see, oh, we have this key evidence that shows your client's guilty, but we can't show it to you? I wrote a column about it, and then they took away my security clearance and said, you no longer can work on this case as a punishment. And I had a great lawyer that represented me at the Department of Justice and helped me get my security clearance back. So I was saved. But yeah, that's been definitely an eye-opening experience about the way they manipulate classified evidence.
So they were trying to do a quota of like getting enough people in Guantanamo. Was that for budgetary reasons? If you were to,
I think they had just, I don't know that they really planned these things out that well, but I think that was the intention, that we were going to invade Afghanistan and it was going to be full of Al-Qaeda people. And then they had cells ready for them at Guantanamo. And Guantanamo was basically an interrogation chamber. So we're going to send them there. The laws don't apply there because it's not on U.S. soil. That was the theory. And we can interrogate them and use whatever methods we need to get all this information from them about future plots on America. I mean, it was dumb, really, if you think about it.
That was the equivalent of the 29-year-old kid from Trenton. Like, you got to have someone to go after. And it's like,
Right.
yeah, can you imagine if they built hey, we built Guantanamo to get terrorists. How many terrorists you got? Oh, well, just like 2 or 3.
Well, I think also by the time the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, any high-level Al-Qaeda person had got the hell out of there, So who are they going to round up? And, they didn't really know how to find the terrorists. They didn't really speak the language. They don't have shirts that show that they're terrorists. So they just started paying people, hey, tell us who they are. And of course, in one of the poorest countries on earth, you start throwing cash around to turn in terrorists, they're going to turn people in, and they're not necessarily going to be the right people. So that's really what happened. And we had there was 700 people at Guantanamo at one point, and they were all kind of quietly released, except for maybe, I think there's only 25 there now or something.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What was the outcome? Oh, sorry, Patrick. What was the outcome then for that person you represented?
My client ended up getting released. Back to his home in Kandahar. He's there now. I still talk to him sometimes. He got no compensation because he got sent back to his home country. So he didn't get a dime. All his resources were taken from him when he was sold to the Americans.
Was he tortured when he was?
He was tortured in Afghanistan. But he never really gave any information. So it wasn't all that relevant to my representation of him, but yeah, he was mistreated.
You should get him on your show. If not, I'll put him on my show.
He doesn't speak English. You have to speak to him. You have to have a Pashto. He speaks Pashto. So
yeah, and probably he's like, you know what? I don't want to see another American after that. Forget it. Stick to my village.
Oh, he likes me. He likes me. But,
no, I'm sure he likes you.
I mean, part of the problem was when Obama came in, he promised to close Guantanamo. I don't know if you remember that. He said within 1 year. And Rahm Emanuel talked him out of that. He said, basically, there's no upside for it for you. But for me, I was just starting to represent my client. I told him, hey, there's a new president coming in and things are going to change and we're going to get you out of here. And it turned out to not be true. So it definitely caused, I had a bad period in my relationship with my client because he's like, you lied to me. You said things were going to change and they didn't change. And I was like, I didn't lie to you, but what I said wasn't true. I thought it was true at the time, you know.
Well, I heard your conversation with Jimmy where he was talking about Obama and how he received more money from Wall Street than McCain.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Citigroup told him who to put on his cabinet. That's all. Assange revealed all that. So
yeah, Jimmy's got a great patter down about Obama, where he'll say like Obama, he was his whole cabinet was put on by Citigroup. He dropped more bombs. He dropped so many more bombs on Afghanistan that we ran out of bombs. We threw 14 million people out of their homes. He just goes down the list of all of Obama's, crimes and misdemeanors, and he's just got it at the tip of his tongue.
I think Trump might have beaten Obama's record for the frequency of bombs. I think Obama was like 1 an hour or something like that during his whole presidency that he dropped on people, and Trump is like 1 every 20 minutes or something. So.
Incredible. Yeah, you don't even hear about it. That, and we've talked to other people on our unfettered speech about this. Like I think Matt Ho talked about how all this is classified, and Dave DeCamp from Anti-War. So they're dropping bombs all the time. But it's, the way that they want to do these wars now is just do them under the radar, not have them on NBC News at night, just be around the world causing mayhem and burning up military equipment so we can buy more. That's really what it's about.
Well, who's the one whistleblower that went to prison because he basically disclosed that the drone program was complete fraud? This was under Obama. That basically 90% of the people being killed have no connection, are the wrong person, are collateral damage. I think it was Thomas Drake, maybe.
Oh yeah, Thomas Drake. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Well,
yeah. I mean,
so that's classification. It's like it's a total scam, and you don't know. You'll never know what you don't know unless somebody wants you to know it. So what can you do about it?
Well, I think that's one of the things. I think in Integrity Media, we were big supporters of Assange, and just because how important that is to have somebody willing to stick his neck out and release the information that we need to know about our own government, like the crimes that they're committing in our name that we're not allowed to know about, And, I think the thing that was so important about Assange is that he released the information in real time and official documents that no one could dispute. So, I think that's why they tried to kill him and tortured him.
Yeah, I mean, and that, if you think about that, Assange hurt them, right? Because he was putting out things that were factually correct, that were classified, that they didn't want us to know for whatever reason. It turns out they'll just do it anyway. Even if you do know, they just keep doing it anyway. But we just had someone on the show coming out maybe next week. His name is Colonel Jacques Beau. Have you ever heard of him, Mike?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so we had Jacques Beau on. So Jacques Beau he's a military guy from Switzerland, and he does military analysis. And basically his thing when he worked for the Swiss and when he worked for NATO too, is, you put out a situation report, right? And you say, okay, here's what this side wants. And here's what they're willing to give. Here's what they're not willing to give. Here's what the other side wants. Here's what they're willing to give. Here's what they're not. Well, he does that kind of thing. And he does, analysis about Ukraine and other military conflicts. The EU slapped sanctions on him, meaning he can't go to the bank, he can't spend money, can't go to the grocery store, because they claim he's saying narratives that support Putin. And it's like, okay, so if an individual says, I don't think Ukraine can win this war, you're going to treat him like a country that's on the naughty list just for expressing. It's really mind-blowing. And when they do it, it's not like they bring you up for a hearing. You basically get a letter in the mail. Hey, your bank's been frozen. Or maybe you don't even get a letter in the mail. Wow. He did get an order signed by Kaja Kallas, who runs the EU foreign ministry. But anyway, he can't leave his house, can't travel, can't buy. If he has, someone gives him cash, I guess he can sneak it to someone without them knowing who he is, but he can't spend money just for saying what he thinks about the Ukraine conflict. So, I mean,
Is
that's
he
a
in
new level.
Switzerland? Is he in Switzerland?
He's in Belgium, but he's a Swiss citizen. Um, and so he's stuck in the EU. If he were in Switzerland, at least he could move around Switzerland. But he's stuck in the EU. He can't leave the EU. And of course, he can't spend money unless he spends cash. I guess he can hop in a car. But when he gets to, I don't know how it works if he could hop in a car and drive to Switzerland. But anyway, it's extreme financial punishment just for expressing his opinions.
Wrong think.
Wrong think.
Yeah.
So that's pretty amazing.
Well,
That's where things are headed. And they're testing this stuff out, right?
Yeah.
All these countries are testing this stuff out to see how it works. And they're all on the same page, whether it's, Australia is letting people, or is saying you've got to show ID because, we're really worried about children and social media. We don't want children on social media. Okay, well, if I'm not 16, do I still have to show ID? Oh, yeah, right. You still do, So now every Australian has to show ID to get online. That's pretty chilling. Spain's working on the same thing. No aliases. So, all those people on X who operate under a pseudonym of any kind, that would be illegal in some of these countries. And of course, what the UK is doing is unbelievable, right? I mean, the cradle of human rights and democracy is doing wild things about speech. You can't even, if you say something at a bar that the pub keeper finds offensive, you can be arrested. So, they're kind of the front line now. Any banter that's considered, hateful for however that is determined. And all these terms are so loose that they can, you can drive a truck through them. But anything that's deemed hateful, you can be imprisoned for just for saying it.
Well, well, I think that's also now, you hear the talk of, or I've heard the talk of, people saying civil war, civil war, civil war, which I actually technically think we're in a civil war right now based on what's happening in Minneapolis, what's happened in Chicago, LA, where you have city and state just not cooperating with federal and doing everything they can to undermine it. I mean, that to me, that's a definition of a civil war. But also, I don't see a civil war like north-south, what we saw, what history showed us. You don't have to believe history anymore. But in terms of like line up, ready, aim, fire, because the government doesn't need to do that, right? I mean, they just turn you off. Credit card doesn't work. Suppress you on social media. They don't even need to kill your account on social media. They just throttle it. They turn it down so you can't get any traction.
Right.
They debank you. What are you going to do? I mean, what?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you think you're subject to it. I have the feeling we probably are, at least for some of our episodes. We have pretty big guests sometimes, and they get like 100 views and the full episode, and you're like, wait a minute. Like this person has 1 million followers. We have 100. Like, come on. So anyway, who knows? But yeah, that's really true. I think in terms of civil war, people throw that term around loosely. I mean, if you think about, you're saying history, Mike, but think about civil wars in history, whether it's Rome, you've got, one faction of the government against one other faction of the government. They all had armies, right? You know what I mean? So every time there was a civil war in Rome, it was some general running some part of the world who had an army. And he's like, you know what? I should be emperor, not this other asshole. So then that becomes, and he tells his army, like, hey, if we win, you guys are all going to be rich, right? So let's do this thing. That's how, or even in our Civil War, right? It was people with standing armies. The South said, hey, you know what? We're taking the weapons. In South Carolina, that's where it started. We're taking the weapons and we're forming our own army. It's not just like people saying, you know what? Let's get together to start a civil war. It doesn't work that way.
Take our guns down to the Capitol and start shooting.
Yeah, that's not how it happens. It's like what happens is some faction of the government fights against another faction of the government. And so that's what you're talking about here, that you kind of see that's kind of chilling when you saw them in Minnesota, Tim Walz saying like, we might have to call it the National Guard or the State Guard against the feds. It's like, yow, that's civil war right there. Cause you got the guns, you can arguably say if you're Tim Walz, like, hey, these people report to me and they've got guns and I'm going to, here's a standing order. I want you to do X, Y, Z. That's kind of scary that it could, where that was even spoken about to me. I mean, that to me is a bizarre statement.
How when you guys formed Integrity Media, and I mean the group of people that you put together, I mean I got to meet a lot of them in September when I was in Chicago. How important was it for you to, carve out what you wanted it to be, and what were your thoughts on it when you did it? As you know, we spent the last hour talking about all this stuff.
Um, I mean, for me, it was really just, I've sort of been in the independent media world since early Iraq War. I lived in California for a bit. This was maybe a little bit after Pat's time there. Um, and and I got exposed, Chicago's kind of a provincial town. Our public radio is pretty provincial. We don't really get a lot of different points of view, but was different for me, and especially at that time. And so, yeah, I've relied on independent media since the early 2000s to inform me. And I've seen like how dishonest mainstream media is. I mean, I think the other thing is, you talk about access journalism, like which is basically what you get from it, at least when it comes to foreign affairs in mainstream media. It's access journalism. It's like, well, this official from the government says this, and that's what they reported. We saw that during the Iraq War, and it's like the people that had the best access to government officials had the worst information because the government officials are all lying. And it's the people on the outside that are doing their own research, as Pat said, that are getting it right. And so that's sort of what I learned, and I've sort of have a group of friends around me that are super smart, like Pat. Um, and we just figured out a strategy for how to support the media that we rely on and think is so important. And I credit people like you, Michael, that just for having voices out there and having conversations with people without any limits. You're not you can't you're not telling people, hey, don't talk about the vaccine because that's my sponsor. It's just free flowing, and that's really what we want. We want people to be unfettered and tell the
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah. I mean, I love your show, Mike, for that reason. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with everything all your guests say, but hey, I'm a critical thinker. If they say something that I think's out there, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but I can make that determine. I don't need a fact-checking board or information of truth, Minister of Information to tell me what's true or not. I'll figure it out. So I like your guests, and they're great personalities. Even if you think, they're saying something that's a little off, it's like the next thing that comes out of their mouth might be like, hell yeah, that makes sense. That's the way that a person should be able to consume information, is have a broad range of stuff. And I think when we started Integrity Media, we're like, instead of having one organ that just publishes things, why don't we support the ecosystem, right? And everybody who's out there doing something that we think is good. And again, that's kind of subjective. But one of the things we're not is partisan. So, I think if Leonard's political journey probably started on the left, it's fair to say. My dad was a Reagan Republican, and I was never super political, but I guess you might call me a libertarian and independent libertarian. But so we're all skeptical of someone who says, oh, because it's this party, like this party's going to save us. I know you always say, Mike, this is not a superhero movie, but when
I'm sorry, I'm
when
laughing. So I'm getting so much, so I didn't mean to cut you off, but people are giving me so much shit on X. Like, I'm tired of hearing about that. I'm tired of hearing how you say you're not an absolutist and this is not a superhero movie. But I say it intentionally because it's all over my feed with this stuff, this superhero nonsense.
yeah.
So sorry. So it's
Well,
funny you said it.
there's some good guy and there's some bad guy, and it's like, hey, and maybe we're a little negative that way. It's like, yeah, we believe that if you tell me someone's a bad guy, I'd believe that. But if you think the alternative is like the guy in the other party, like you're mistaken, right? Like so, we all know what the Biden administration did with censorship. We know what the Trump administration is doing with censorship. They're all taking the tools that George W. Bush gave them years ago, and they're using those tools. Right. So it doesn't really matter. So we don't really push partisan voices. We have people who are probably, consider themselves left wing, and we probably have people that consider themselves like iconoclastic right wing. We don't have anyone who's, a Republican or a DNC Democrat or an RNC Republican. We don't, I mean, you got to be independent, right? Like even my dad, when he was involved in like precinct politics, and people would sell him, it's like, well, you're not, and he would say like, well, I believe this, but I don't believe that. And like the people in the precinct level politics in those days in the 70s, they'd be like, well, you're not a real Republican. He's like, why not? And he's like, well, because you got to believe all this stuff. And he's like, no, I'm not going to believe all this stuff. Like, that's why I'm an individual. Why do I got to believe all this stuff? So we look for people who are agnostic a little bit and who are trying to find the truth, whatever that may mean for them. So we support people like that. And then we've got a podcast that we do where we bring on some of those guests to talk about, whatever they want to talk about. We also have a little webpage that probably nobody reads, but it's called Free Speech News. And if there's articles about some of the things we talked about today, it's freespeechnews.org. And we just post articles that we think are interesting or that are around the world about how, all these governments that have approval ratings in the teens, some of them, or the low 20s, they're desperate to stay in power so they can keep stealing. And so if they can't win at the ballot box, they're going to figure out some way to silence their critics and vilify their critics. So there's a lot going on right now with free speech, and we post it all on Free Speech News.
You're talking about the EU when you talk, right?
Well, the EU is probably the tip of the spear. But as I said, these people are trying out stuff, and then other people are using it too. Like the Five Eyes countries, they all share intelligence, and so they're all trying different techniques to see how it works and see what they can get away with. But yeah, I think they know the writing's on the wall for them. Like you can't have a 20% approval rating. But the problem is there was a guy named Simplicius who just wrote a piece on this, and he said, the problem is these people are pushing, the dogs are not eating this dog food, right? Nobody wants these policies that impoverish them, right? That make it harder to get healthcare, that make these wars inevitable, that, all these things that they're doing that where you can't, you can't go to college without incurring $200,000 of debt. Everyone knows what people would like to have, but in order to even try to give that to people, their whole world blows up, right? Like all their donors go away. That's how they make money. And so they're trying to push something that's kind of impossible to push on people. And so if you can't convince them, then you've got to start using other things. You use the media to tell them they're bad people or that they're Putin supporters or whatever, if they question what they're saying, or you just start debanking them, whatever it is. You're going to figure out ways to stay in power. And power is lucrative for these people, right? I mean, look how rich I just saw something on X. I was going to share it, but I'm afraid if I share a screen with you, Mike, that my whole system will explode. So I'm not going to do it. But there was a graph I saw on X showing the differential between politicians' net worth and an ordinary person's net worth since the 60s. And it's like, it used to be about level. They were maybe a little richer because it was, hey, if you're going to run for Congress in 1960, you were probably the local car dealer or whatever. But now it's like multiples, maybe 20 times, maybe 50 times. I can't tell by the scale, but it's huge, the differential. I said this on the podcast yesterday that, Harry Truman used to cut his own grass after he retired. And now Barack Obama's got like a, multi-million-dollar estate, and Tony Blair's a centimillionaire. And that's what they're playing for. They're not playing to make your life better. They're playing to make their lives better.
People come to DC now, not to do public service, but to get rich. That's
where get rich. Yeah, that's where the money is. It's the richest. It's the richest counties in the United States.
I think in the world.
In the world.
Yeah.
It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, all that printed money. Yeah.
It always shocks me that people still believe, the government line. Like this has always been like a contrarian. So when the government told me, like during the Iraq War, that I have to hate the French because the French are not in favor of us bombing Iraq. Like, why should I hate the French just because you tell me to? I mean, it's just like now with Maduro, we're supposed to hate Maduro. And I see so many people that are not on the take, but friends of mine, and they all hate Maduro, because he's whatever. Like, why do people believe anything that they hear out of their government?
I think the one thing they've done, and we should probably wrap up soon, but the one thing that it's a very clever propaganda technique, and they use it all the time now, is that it's like a dopamine hit, right? Like if you can be a good person, if you can be deemed a good person, you feel good about yourself. If someone says, hey, Leonard, you're a good person, right? I mean, that feels great to hear, right? And so what they do is they frame all these issues, which are really gray. And, there's obviously arguments on both sides, but they frame it black and white. And so they say, hey, if you support this, you're supporting the good. Like we're good. We're eagles and flags and freedom and troops and all that. But if you say anything nice about Maduro or Putin or Xi Jinping, then you're a bad person. Do you want to be a bad person, Leonard? Like, why are you supporting a dictator? And it's like life is not that
I
simple.
get that, but I actually feel bad when my opinion jives with what the government is telling me. Then I feel dirty if I'm yeah, I think maybe they're right about that.
I tell you, yesterday watching Pam Bondi on the Hill, and like some of the Democrats that are questioning her, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't even believe I'm agreeing with some of these people right now. I'm like, I can't
Yeah.
believe it. Like, but also with that, I think, and I know we're getting to the end here, but I find it's so painful for people to have an awakening, right? I would have thought more would have awakened after COVID and just kind of like the roof had been lifted. But then you see as we go, Israel or, Republicans, Democrats or MAGA or I guess, I mean, and this is me being naive, the generalization of the awakening, but some people, they just can't come to terms with the fact that maybe Fox News has lied to them for 30 years or
Well,
CNN has lied to them.
what's the
Well,
old
they
saying? I don't know if it's Mark Twain, but it's like it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them that they've been fooled.
Exactly
People don't
right.
want
I
to
was going
let
to say
that
it a
go.
different way, Leonard, which is that, again, bringing con men back into it. But con men will tell you that once you've hooked your mark, he's going to be your biggest supporter, right? So
Right,
he doesn't want to admit that he was conned.
right,
So even when like the explanations get crazy, they're like, oh, that's why, because you
right,
broke your finger. That's why you can't sign the check to pay me back.
right.
Um, so they buy into it, and it's like it's really hard to give it up, right? And say like, yeah, I was wrong. I mean, I was wrong about a ton of things, right? So, and I used to believe what people told. I used to think about, not that I'm a big believer in conspiracies now, but surely there are some. But at the time, I was like, how could this WND thing be a conspiracy? Like you'd have to have a lot of people in it. It's not just one guy or two guys making a pact. It'd be like, how's the whole government involved? But hey, live and learn, man. Like that's the case. And I had friends tell me that it was all bullshit at the time. I didn't believe them. But there, it's hard to admit you're wrong.
People fall in line, and I think that's one of the things that I'm always so disappointed about in human nature is to just see, people just they fall in line, and it's careerism a lot of the times. They sense what they need to say to get ahead in this world and what they need to not say, and um, it's it's a it just keeps it's a perpetuating machine that just keeps going, and people are willing to support it for what seems like a whatever, a nickel, such
Yeah.
small stakes.
So
And
yeah, there was we had someone invited someone to the Integrity Media event in September, and she was not a big, she doesn't follow this stuff like most people. You've said this, Mike. Hey, people have their daily lives, right?
yeah,
Like they're not that interested in whatever happened in Venezuela. They're trying to pay for groceries and get their kids through school and keep their health or whatever. So they're not worried about all this stuff, and they don't follow it the way we might. But she kind of, again, I think she was one of those people who is like, oh, I'm not comfortable being here. All these people are saying things that are, they're saying things that bad people say, But then when she heard some of the speeches, which were quite moving, some of them, right? Like she was really moved by the whole event, and she's like, oh, I'd love to come next year. It just takes something. And I'm not sure if that was her epiphany in life or anything, but I'm just saying, like, when you've bought into this stuff, it's as you say, Leonard. There's social benefits you get. There might be financial benefits, career benefits, whatever. Why do you want to be the nail that sticks up, right? If you got other things in your life that you're
well, it's
busy working
also,
on.
I know we have to go, but you see that so much with Israel, Palestine. I'm Jewish. I've grown up around Zionists, but I've sort of had an epiphany since October 7th, and had to sort of study a lot of the things that I thought I understood about the forming of Israel in 1948 and things, and my views have changed a lot. But when I talk to people, especially in some of the more Jewish areas around Chicago, some of the Jewish suburbs, um, they freak out when I have these conversations because they've never heard anyone challenge this orthodoxy before. And it's scary to them. And they immediately think, well, I must be a terrorist. I must be a bad person. Like, why would I even question this? But to me, it's incredible that you can live in a bubble in this world, around people that all have the same views, and no one's ever challenged your views in 50 years of living. So I think that's part of what we're trying to do is, expose or help people like you, Michael, expose people to different points of view.
I know we gotta go. It's all the more reason you guys got to come back on, and we'll do this. We'll turn on and chat again for another hour and a half.
Talk movies. Talk movies next time, Mike.
But the October 7th stuff to me, and I'm not a student of history. I've said that many times. But let's take that out of the equation for a second. You cannot tell me the way that was the way it happened. There had to have been some type of preparation and planning for paramotors flying in the air. There's no way that was put together in a week.
Right.
So you're telling me that nobody saw these paramotors? It's 15 by 21 miles. I think it's a small area.
Probably the most surveilled population.
Nobody saw it. Nobody saw anything. No, leading up to that. I just don't. I don't believe it.
How many coin flips, Mike, before you realize it's a fixed coin, right? So, but the first thing that I thought about it, and again, it's not really something that I spend a lot of time on, but, why do people do terrorist events in the first place? It's because they're weak. They can't invade. They don't have the army to invade you. So what they're going to do is provoke you into overreaction. That's what we did. That's what happened in September 11th. That's what they're for, right? That's even Munich in 1972. It's to provoke the other side into overreaction. So you'd think at this point, having lived as long as I have anyway, you'd say, well, okay, if I were a politician in this situation, what I would do is not overreact. I do what I have to do to keep people, there's going to be obviously a need for some sort of retribution here, but you're going to minimize it and figure out a way to move past it and, get what you want out of life. But instead, what they've done is just, catastrophic. I don't, say what you will about it, but I don't think it's helped Israel become more liked in the world. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of backlash. Anyway, that's probably for another time, but it's great for you to have us on, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Where can people find you guys? I didn't mean to cut you off, Patrick.
There's the Unfettered Speech podcast, which is on all the platforms, but YouTube, Rumble, and also there's Free Speech News, which is just a little newsletter. But if you're interested in free speech issues, check it out. It's also on Substack.
Leonard, anything you want to add?
No. If you get charged with a federal crime and you need a good lawyer, you could look me up.
Or if you're in Guantanamo, you're an expert.
If we all get sanctioned,
I'm not doing any more of those cases. No.
Yeah, if we all get sanctioned someday, we'll know who to call.
Yeah,
guys, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for everything you're doing, and it was great to meet you guys in person last year in Chicago. And it was a fantastic trip. That was actually, it was my first time I was ever in downtown Chicago. So
right.
It was. I got to run on the river walk or whatever down there.
Well, it was a beautiful time. We got lucky with the weather. It was beautiful.
Yeah. We have to come back this year, Mike. It's going to be another.
Yeah, for sure.
It'll be a good event.
Can't wait.
It's a great city, except for this winter. It's been a little rough, but Chicago's a great city. Pat's originally.
Yeah, I grew up there. I love Chicago. It's fantastic. And Mike, you're from Cleveland. We're all Midwesterners.
Yeah.
So we didn't even talk about that, but probably. The Midwestern thing has probably, contributed to our skeptical worldview. I think Midwesterners don't buy authority that well. That's just my take.
I'm going to end on the note of Cleveland is the world's best kept secret. If you two don't know that, you know it now. So don't tell anybody. Anybody listening, don't let it get out. But yeah,
I love Cleveland. Yeah, it's great.
It's the world's best kept secret. How can you not love it?
Well, you had a dead lake for a while, but now it's all good, right?
Yeah.
The Lake Erie.
Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, guys. I look forward to the next one.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Mic drop.